All right. All right. I guess we're live now, huh? How do I turn this? What is this? This microphone thing here. I guess it's just showing how loud I am. Well, okay. So, my plan is just to get here and start talking, and eventually I'm gonna cut it up into more focused content. And you know, I'm thinking of making like funny content, but maybe it'll be more focused on education. I'm not sure right now. I'm not claiming to be an expert in things. I'm just, a black individual in South LA who happens to have a really high IQ. And I see a lot of stuff kind of going on that I just wanted to talk about because there's a lot of weird stuff going on in the country right now. And to be honest, it seems like the average person is just not all that worried about it. Like, they don't maybe understand some of the significance of just the tension between the left and the right, black and white people, Christianity, and uh, non-conservative, more liberal values and stuff like that. Uh, Not necessarily religion versus atheism, but in particular Christianity versus atheism, or Christianity versus progressive Christianity, which both are just big battles going on right now, and the average person is not really worried about it. But it's very important because, you know, we kind of inhabit this country together with, like, the way America works and why we're such a successful country, probably the most successful country in all of history, is because we have a melting pot of different people who think differently, who see things a different way. I don't know why the camera keeps shaking, but we have this mix of people who view the world differently. And the whole idea or the point is that we talk it out and we discuss things, we have debates, we that's why you have the legal system set up in the way it is, so you try to have a balance between the two major political parties, even though political parties were never really a part of the original conception of America and stuff like that. That was actually warned against for the exact reasons we're seeing now. But ideally, even with the political parties being a thing, even with human tribalism inevitably being a thing, the the solution to kind of what's going on in our country right now is like cohesion, to reach out to the other side of people who don't think like you, people who might not look like you, who might not have your same religion or affiliate themselves with the same crowd, right? And have a conversation with them. And not a conversation where you're sitting there and you're trying to pick them apart and be like, look, see, I'm destroying the liberals, or, oh, look, see, I'm destroying these white conservatives or whatever. But to actually reach out and be like, okay, where are you coming from? You know what I mean? Like, why do you think the way you do? Why do you see the world the way you do? And is it, well, not to put my own judgment on is it valid, but to assume that it's valid, right? So, I mean, that's one big thing. That's actually really a precursor to being able to do that is honesty, because obviously you can't just listen to what everybody says, and it's mainly just because people are liars and people will say things that aren't true to try to accomplish some sort of means of sort, you know. But like honesty, it's a very important virtue. This is why, like, another reason America is so successful is not just because we have two spectrums and we're encouraged to kind of find the middle ground in between them, but, and this might be a little bit controversial to people, but it's because we're built on Judeo-Christian values and certain stuff like honesty, don't steal from people, adultery's bad, stuff like that. Like, it goes much, 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 much deeper than that. Like, it's, the Bible's not just like some guide some advice to try to tell you how to be a better person or anything. It's a lot more complicated and deeper of a book than that. But a lot of the principles like that Christianity stands on are very, very important to keeping like a stable society, like honesty, for example. And we're kind of seeing the effects now of having all these corrupt politicians, people in power, people who are supposed to have, you know, supposed to have people's best interest at heart, and they're instead selling us out to foreign powers or what have you to line their pockets. Not only that, but while these rich elites are sitting there having us fighting at the bottom, right? Because people aren't honest with themselves and they're not encouraged to be honest with themselves, so of course they're not going to be encouraged to be honest with other people. It's hard to reach out, like it's hard to reach out and to realize, like, wait a minute, we actually have a lot more in common than we have differences, right? There's something kind of weird going on. It's like, why am I fighting my fellow Americans who are trying just as hard to, you know, live life as I am? Like, why are we at odds with each other? Why are we not at odds with these people that have way too much money and way too much power and way too much influence, and they just decide to hoard more of it, right? Like they just decide, like, I already have too much, and I'm still gonna steal from those that are trying their best and barely scraping by at the bottom, and squeezing them of every ounce of productivity and profit that I can get out of them, you know, to feed my own ego, maybe. Like I just can't understand those people and that sort of mindset, because my biggest problem, if I had a lot of money, would be I just wouldn't have it for long because I'd be giving it to too many people. And that's a bad thing, because it just means, like, if I were to have a bunch of money, it wouldn't necessarily translate into power or influence because I'd be naive with it. Whereas these people that actually generate wealth, they have the wisdom that comes with power. I mean, you know, being able to generate wealth, which leads to power and influence by default, in a way. So it's another complex problem. You know what I mean? It's like we try to make this system around competent, good people succeed, and bad people who suck at everything, you know, they don't succeed. But unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way, you know. I mean, it does sometimes, but what we're seeing now is basically the swamp, right? So one thing I'm really seeing happening that's just, it's kind of how do I put it? It's like I can kind of see the dragon under the Hydra that looks like it has many heads, but it has one heart. Or I'm not sure if that's actually how the story of the Hydra works. Let me actually share this on social media. I don't know why I haven't shared this already. But yeah, man. I can kind of see the thing that's at the base of the Hydra. And it all seems to be these rich politicians in power who want to stay in power, so they use the media basically and other forms of entertainment, and like a variety of different complex things, but it's basically the same thing. These people in power who want to stay in power or don't want to give up their power or their lifestyle or their influence, and so they will sell out the the lowest common denominator, which is the average American citizen who doesn't have the time, energy, or even intelligence oftentimes to see through, you know, the blanket that's being thrown over their heads. But hold on, sharing this on Facebook just in case anybody want to, you know, stroll through, see what's up with your boy. But Yeah, so that's the main problem. That's basically what's going on in like everything when it comes to race relations, when it comes to left versus right, when it comes to the current division, the Capitol riots that we've seen, the BLM and Antifa riots that we've seen, the protesting that's going on, and the rising tensions. It all comes down to the same thing: is that the rich people in power, like they've been doing this for years and not just years and years. They've been doing this for generations and generations, like centuries, like probably since the beginning of civilization. It's like you have those that consolidate a lot of power and influence, and that's the unfortunate part. Is like once you start to consolidate power and influence, absolute power corrupts. So they don't want to give up their power. They don't want to give up their influence. So they come up with clever ways in their power and influence to have the people at the bottom kind of fight each other, so they don't understand the kind of scam that's going on. Like, I mean, it's just been happening since the beginning of time, basically, or at least the beginning of human civilization. Probably animals in the animal kingdom do it too. But I don't feel like going down that path of thinking right now. It's just, it's unfortunate, It's unfortunate. We should all be coming together at times like this, not pushing each other apart. And so I have a video on my channel that I'm not really proud of, which is, it's like, I mean, just the way I titled it was terrible. It's like my rant about black people, right? But where I was coming from with that, and it's like it's just been made clearer, more prevalent, and more dangerous nowadays. But is that we tend to promote racism in the guise of anti-racism, and it's a complex thing. But I mean, in my opinion, it's not that complex. But that's why I bring up my IQ so much to people who might be wondering, why do you always talk about it? It's like, because like things like this to me are simple, but I have to understand to everybody else, like it's not necessarily going to be super simple. But basically, it's like you're promoting racism using anti-racism as the premise, basically going like white people are racist, we have to fight racism because racism is a problem. So we have to find a way to disadvantage white people and give that advantage to black people, even though Asians are really the most advantaged group. People are catching on, and there's legislation like Asians are now being actively discriminated against because they do well in society. Not only that, but there's been times in American history where we've actually discriminated against Asians and like put them in concentration camps, like literal concentration camps. Like during the it was either, I think it was World War II, where after Pearl Harbor we were just like, yeah, see, no, we're all Japanese citizens. Y'all gonna have to, you know, America's done some things that obviously um, it's not proud of. A lot of things, but that's what makes it complicated. Is that you have real valid like you could go, oh, you can't use racism to fight racism, right? But like there's still an emotionally valent argument that's really really hard to parse through of they like our ancestors, and we're not that far removed from our ancestors that had to go through the Jim Crow era, segregation, like actual racism, even slavery. That was maybe 2 or 3 generations ago, like one or two old people, like 80-year-olds or so away from slavery, like actual on plantations. So it's a hard argument to have. Like it's just a hard conversation to have in general. The problem I see is that we just get to beat white people over the head with it, because obviously like we were the victims in that scenario. and we just get to say, oh yeah, y'all some evil sons of bitches for having doing that. And not only that, we deserve some sort of, like, because we were oppressed for so long, you, you can't expect us to be running a fair race with you when you've had such a large head start, which is true, right? So, it's not a completely invalid argument. It's just, in my opinion, it's the wrong argument to have, because it's like, well, what are you gonna do, man? Like, you can't just ask modern people to pay for the crimes of their ancestors and just think that's gonna be okay. Like, as you're black, it might sound like a much more appealing thing, like reparations, but you have to understand that, of course, it's going to sound appealing. But imagine being white and having to have giving up your hard-earned money to to people that maybe didn't have to earn it because of the crimes of your ancestors, which the people you're giving your money to were never slaves, and you never owned slaves, but you're expected to give up your money to them regardless, right? And to understand, like, that's going to be a huge problem. Like, it's not gonna, right, like, it's not a good place for us to put our stake in the ground, because it's very what is it called, uninclusive. What is it? There's words that we use, like, to racist. There we go. It's very racist. But yeah, it's like, you got to think, man. Obviously, there are certain things that are going to be appealing to you because you get to, you're going to have, like, not certain advantages, but certain things maybe you get to do that other people don't, purely because of the color and the racial background and the ethnic heritage and stuff like that. But the way we're using it is just so irresponsible. I think that's the word. It's just irresponsible. You know what I mean? We're just fighting this anti-racism battle because, I mean, it sounds like, I mean, who likes racism, right? Who likes fucking racism? Nobody likes racism. That's something we can all rally and fight against. And we've been doing it as a country with white people and all the other ethnic groups that find themselves gathered in America. We've been doing that for, a decent amount of time now. And that's not getting any sort of credit, right? And I see that as a huge problem, you know. So what really ticked me off was, like, the Capitol riot situation, where people are starting to go, look at what white people get away with, right? That was our reaction to the situation, was, look at what white people get away with. Like, what? What the hell what kind of reasoning is that? This is what white people get away with. Can you imagine if there were can you imagine if there were more in that riot? Oh my gosh, it would have went way differently. What one what does that have to do with the situation that happened? What does race have to do anything with a bunch of people, Trump supporters, storming the Capitol because Canada didn't win or some shit, right? Like, that is the least black thing I've ever heard of in my entire life. Like, we have absolutely nothing to do with that. So why are we injecting ourselves and making a race problem out of that situation? Right? It's an example of irresponsibility when it comes to inheriting, let's say, the more noble or more righteous side of history, right? Because we came up from slavery, because we were oppressed for so long, and we've broken out of the oppression and have shown the rest of the world how to do so. And slavery is now like something on the fringes, it's on the fringes in this society. And that's another thing that we don't really, like, again, we've all been on the same side as Americans against racism for a long time. The rest of the world, there are countries where, like, racism, I mean, just like full on slavery, like actual slavery of black folks is going on today. Anytime I try to bring that up, it's like, well, that has nothing to do with America. That has nothing to do with us. It's like mind blowing to me, the hypocrisy that we kind of have when it comes to the race situation. But regardless, um, that's what really opened my, like, kind of, maybe it was like, all right, I got to speak up about this because this is absolutely fucking ridiculous. Like, we're just injecting race into a situation, and that's supposed to be the black perspective on the situation, right? That's supposed to be like what every black person thinks about the situation is, oh, if there were more black people there, then it would have the police would have been way more brutal and way more, they would have been popping people left and right, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, what do you even, whatever. So one thing I'll give to that side of the argument is, it's true that if it was BLM saying, hey, we're going to show up to the Capitol, and we're going to tear some shit up, right? They would have had a lot more security there. If it was just BLM and Antifa in general, even if they didn't threaten to, shut shit down like they always do, but just threatened to be there would have been a lot more security. What you have to understand, though, is that Trump supporters have not had a history of being violent. They have had a history of being vilified and demonized by the media, but they haven't had a history of actually being violent, right? They haven't had a history of like when you look at Trump rallies and shit, like you'll see at the end of it, Antifa shows up and they squabble with the Proud Boys or whatever. But for the most part, it's just a bunch of old white people and veterans and shit, like waving little flags, singing the national anthem, and then they go the fuck home. Right? That's what a Trump rally has been the past 4 years. So that's why you didn't see a lot of security at the Capitol riot or at the Capitol building at that time. Is just not the right that riots, right? And we see why now, because the media, they're not going to call you violent protest. I mean, they're not going to call you violent protesters. They will have no problem calling you treasonous and domestic terrorists and all sorts of things. You don't have the backing of the media, so you can't get away with burning things to the ground and having the media being like actual reporter sitting there in front of like a burning building. Like, this is actually on live TV. You can see them. They're just like, well, like a burning building literally behind it. Well, the protests are mainly peaceful, right? And it's like, yeah, you don't get that same courtesy from the media, let's say, on the right, or if you're a conservative or a Trump supporter. I mean, you have 500,000 people show up to the nation's capital, which is basically the biggest, where all the criminals that are selling you out to these foreign entities and lining their pockets at your expense, this is where they all like congregate, literally. You have like nearly 500,000 people. Some estimate it was over 500,000. Some people say it was around 100,000, but all estimates are between 100,000 and up, right? Like, it was at least 100,000 people there. 5 people died. 4 of them were supporters, right? It's not like they were killing police officers left and right or something. I mean, one person died from blunt force trauma to the head, and that one's still being investigated. Supposedly somebody threw a fire extinguisher at him and hit him in the back of the head. He ended up succumbing to his injuries in the hospital. The other 4 people that died, it was somebody literally got shot in the head, right? Someone else had a stroke, someone had a heart attack, and another person got trampled by the other people that were there. So, I mean, it's just seemed like, oh, this crazy attack on the Capitol. And then you look at the videos of people that were there. I mean, you have people sitting there in Viking uniforms, LARPing and role-playing and shit. It's the majority of it is just people, like, they climbed into the buildings and the top, like, windows and shit, and you just see them, like, waving flag, literally just waving flags out the window, right? They're not attacking people. They're not burning things down. They're not trying to destroy property. You have people putting up their feet on Nancy Pelosi's desk, right? Like that's a hostile takeover? That's a violent, really? But literal building burning behind you, oh, that's mainly peaceful. So that's the kind of shit you have to like. It's like it doesn't matter if you're left, right, black, white, liberal, conservative, whatever. Like you have to be able to see things like that, and it should kind of, kind of make you go, huh? That's it's very, very strange that our news sources are so incredibly biased, and people still kind of listen to them. People still take CNN's word for shit, right? MSNBC's word for shit. Fox News' word for shit. Now, Fox News, I have to give credit because they do have people from the left and people from the right on, and they oftentimes have panels where they'll have a bunch of people from a variety of different perspectives come and have a conversation. That's seen as right wing now, right? They're seen as they're a conservative far right news source, just as bad as CNN, but on the other side. But to be honest, they're like centrist left, if anything. Like I'm gonna be real with you here. Fox News is not a right wing source. They're like centrist left. They just, they didn't even like Trump till like the past 2 years. They were constantly like shredding Trump, and then you'd have the other news sources. See, even Fox News says that Trump, messed up here and stuff. And it's like they were never. When he does good, they'll praise him. When he does bad, they'll chastise him, and criticize him just like anybody else. But they're far right, just because they sometimes say good things about Trump when he does good things, So it's just. So back to what I was saying earlier about the swamp, how this leads back to that is that should wake people up. Like, why is the media so far skewed left? Like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, where centrist left, what would be traditionally considered a liberal value, right? Having conversations with people that don't think like you, when is that a conservative viewpoint? The fact that this is now seen as a right-wing conservative, like, sort of viewpoint, like, why? What's going on here? Why are we being pushed so hard left? Like, why is big tech censoring Republicans and conservatives, but they're not censoring lefties ever, right? Why is it that if we talk about election irregularities when it comes to Trump, you're taking off immediately? The election happened a month and a half ago. I mean, they've been doing it for a while too, though. They've been doing it for a while. Just if you say a certain series of words together, like, oh, there was election fraud, and then you say, without having this pause that I have to intentionally put in between, that's what caused Trump to lose the election, right? Your video's wiped. So, but you can talk about Russian collusion in the 2016 election still to this day, even though people under oath, the very people that brought this investigation in the first place, have come out and openly admitted that there was really no evidence of Russian collusion. It was a smear campaign. And, it was quite effective at kind of putting a fork in some of Trump's plans, because now he can't play nice with Russia or it looks bad. And it's just, they're playing like 4D chess with the population. And they're using the media, they're using news sources, they're using entertainment, rap music or hip hop music. They're using like all these different sources to skew public opinion. And it's sad to me, because it's like, even when I talk to other intelligent folks, like, and it's especially prevalent in, I would say, older folks who, they spent their life learning, they're tired, their brains don't have the same neuroplasticity or the same speed that it had before. So when CNN's constantly, look at Trump, orange man, bad, terrible, 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 and that's all you see, and to be able to see anything else, you have to do tons and tons of research and go check your source. You know what I mean? The independent media, the independent sources are now seen as right wing, so that's almost like a pointer in the direction of unbiased media in a sense, and like you have to understand all this complex shit just to be able to get to the bottom of things. It's most people, they're not going to be doing all that. They don't have the time, the energy, the effort. They don't care, you know. They know they're not going to be able to change things anyway, even if they figure it out. So as far as they're concerned, if the media is like Trump bad, 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 all your movies bad, 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 all your music bad, 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 right? You're just going to start to play along. You're just going to start to go along with it. Because it takes a lot of, it honestly does, it takes a lot of mental energy, even when somebody with the super genius IQ and natural aptitude for openness or a natural like creativity sort of quotient, it's still extremely fucking difficult to kind of go against the grain and like have all the mainstream media like saying one thing and being like questioning that and being like, what's the truth behind the matter? How can I go check these sources? How can I go see who's gonna have like actual unbiased information? Go through all those steps just to figure out some shit that's going on. By next week, they're worried about something else, another quote unquote mistake Trump made, and blah 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 blah. It's like it's like a constant mental battle that honestly, it's like most people aren't gonna fight. Most people aren't gonna fight that. So that's what's kind of going on right now, and it's like it's really, it does seem like a losing battle. This is why I decided like fuck it, I'm gonna just start opening my mouth and hopping on here and getting on YouTube live and start, you know, talking about what's going on. If people hear me, people hear me. If people don't, people don't. But just to, you know, trying to get this perspective out there to try to like try to cut through the bullshit a little bit, because I understand it is hard to like, you know, stay objective, to stay focused on what's true and what's right and what's honest and what's good.
You heard
And so
one finger.
so it's kind of yeah, it's just like important that more people speak up and they're honest about like what they experience and stuff. That's why I had to start speaking up the way I do about like race relations and stuff, like black people in America and what it's actually like being black in America. Because it's like, well, white people can't say what a black person can say about what it's like to be black in America. And the problem with that is black people are highly, like, not only are you encouraged to just spout the same narrative about how racist this country is, it's like you're punished for not doing so. People will like slander you and slash you and like call you all sorts of names. Or you won't be invited to a lot of social events. Trust me. I mean, it's just, it's almost, it really is awful, the sort of ostracization and siloization that comes with really just being honest and truthful about your experience, like as maybe a black man in America, and you're not talking about like, oh, how racist the country is, but like, no, we actually have a lot of opportunities here. Like we have it better than any black person. I mean, any group of dark-skinned individuals have ever had it on in the entire history of the planet ever. Not just because of the time we're living in, but also because we're in America and not, let's say, North Korea or some, you know, a more poorer part of Africa or like a poor part of the world. And we're actually in a rich society that gives us all sorts of freedoms, and it's not perfect, right? Racism still exists, but it's as far as you can go when it comes to minimizing the problem of racial discrimination. I mean, America is, this is, I wouldn't say this is about as good as it gets, but it's as good as it's ever been. So, you know, not only that, we have 1,000,001 safeguards and like institution and bureaus and social movements and just everything focused on ending racism, to the point where it's like you cannot claim to live in a racist country when you look at, you know, all the systems you're surrounded by just by nature of being in this country that protect from literally that exact same thing. Like literally, like if you feel like you're really being racially discriminated against, you can sue and get money for it and be really like well off because of it. Now obviously suing takes some time, and you know, you're not just gonna get rich overnight or get money overnight, but like you can start to generate some wealth if you really have a case of racial discrimination where you can point to where somebody goes, because you're black, I'm not going to give you an opportunity, right? Like if an employee actually does that, well, we're supposed to have a legal system that's impartial and that should be able to rule on things like that. What we're finding is that judges, they're humans too. They're easily bribed, they're easily biased, they're easily persuaded, just like any other human being. And so you can't necessarily count on even Supreme Court justices to make the right decisions. But I mean, by and large, I mean, we've just had so many Supreme Court cases that rule against racial discrimination that you can use in court and bring up and be like, look, see, we found out that this is racism, that this is bad, and this is a similar situation here, right? You can actually bring litigation, against cases of racism. That's kind of, and not to say, oh, we've had a black president, and I'd be naive to think, oh, that means that there's no more racism left in America, but that means there's no more institutional racism left. Like, there's no more, like, that is the highest position of authority you could have in the country. Obviously, there are people behind the scenes and other parts of the government that have a lot of power too, but the president of the United States has some significant power and is a significant figurehead. And the entire world watched America elect a black person as president twice in a majority white country, right? This is still a majority white country, by the way. It was built by us, but we're like 12% of the population. You know what I mean? Like when they call us a minority, like a lot of people look at that as a disparaging term, and it's like, no, it's just because we're a small fraction of the American population. So the fact that we have so much sway and so much social influence, and that we have laws dedicated to protecting us and other disadvantaged groups of people, is just like, I mean, that's about the best it gets. Anything past that, anything past our laws being on our side and being anti-racist, that comes down to interpersonal communication and reaching out to. So here, I'm gonna get real just black and non-objective for a second. It's like it really comes down to, like, from a black perspective, reaching out to white people and just being cool with them, like showing them how cool black people really are, and not because you have to prove something to them. Right? You don't have to prove shit to nobody. We're some really cool individuals, black folk. If you haven't noticed, we make some great music. We like to dance. We're funny as hell. We're very smart and perceptive. We tend to let our emotions override our judgment sometimes, but that's okay too, because emotions are a big part of life as well. But and that's what makes things interesting. That's why we're such great artists, right? It's specifically because of that. So, that's the only way to move forward if we're going to end the discrimination that still exists, which we're not going to be able to, by the way. Like, you're not going to completely end racism. Like, you're not going to make it so that there's nobody left on the planet that is going to prejudge somebody based off of the color of their skin. Like, there's always going to be people that are going to be doing that. And the fact that black people, like, we just get to do it and nobody calls it out. And if you call it out, you're either a coon or a reverse racist or something like that. Right? It's just very dangerous. It's a very dangerous kind of culture we have when it comes to race relations. But basically what I'm saying is, like, where we go from here on out is the only real choice is reaching out to white people and being friends with them, right? Like, and not going, oh, you're racist, I hate you, I'm gonna go protest and burn shit down because of your racism, because you need to stop. So I'm gonna, we have to do something to show you that you have to stop, right? It's like all we're doing, as noble as the goal might sound, on paper, the reality of the situation is all we're doing by promoting this ideology and sticking by it, and all black people, you have to fall in line, like you can't speak out against it. All we're doing is stoking racism on the other side, like actually creating the very environment we're trying to fight to stop, right? It's an inevitable conclusion at this point. Like, you can't look at what's going on right now and not see it. And so that's why I tend to doubt people's motives, right, in their heart on the situation. But I have to also understand, again, this is all complex, and it does all come together like a hydra, right? Like, it has all these different heads, but it has one heart at the center of it. So I have to understand, yeah, like, a lot of people aren't going to see it. Like, it's hard, it's difficult. It's just not all that difficult for me to see. It's just been quite clear. Like, if you look at somebody and put yourselves in their shoes, like, imagine being in the shoes of somebody that's white, and like the same thing that we're preaching against, you come out, and because you're white, now you're a villain, now you're a colonizer, now you're evil, and your ancestors were evil, and you have to pay for your ancestors' evil. You didn't get to choose to come out white. Maybe you wanted to come out black, but unfortunately you come out pale, So imagine that. Like, that happens. So, it just takes empathy. It just takes putting yourself in the shoes of somebody that, especially your enemy. That's the biggest wisdom here, is like, put yourself in the shoes of somebody that you're already kind of willing to hate, right? That's the most important thing you can do. Like, put yourself, like, as a black individual, put yourselves in the shoes of like a white person, and then say your same rhetoric. Like, hear your same rhetoric that you are not allowed to participate in the compass of the color of your skin. You are not allowed to say certain things, whether they're true or not. You're just not allowed to say certain things because of the color of your skin, right? You're not allowed to participate in certain events and cultural events because of the color of your skin. I'm going to immediately judge your athletic abilities, your ethical and moral character, your I'm going to be able to stereotype you and judge you based off of the color of your skin. But if I do the same thing back to you, it's just like the biggest crime in the history of humanity, right? Like, put yourselves in the shoes of a white person, like, hearing this rhetoric coming from a black person and knowing that, like, like, my ancestors did do these people pretty dirty, so there's not really too much, I can't tell them to not be hurt about what went on in their past, And then some white people, like, have come to the more this conclusion that, like, oh, well, white people were oppressed too, we were indentured servants and all that kind of stuff. It's like, that's just not the path to go down. But the fact that people are starting to come up with stuff like that, like, you have to understand, it's like, it's just not fair that you get to ride off of the oppression of your ancestors and, like, use it as an advantage, in a sense, in the modern world. And it's like, if somebody points out, like, hey, you're using your ancestors' oppression as an advantage, it's a really complicated fucking idea. So it's like, it's easy to point, like, people can just say, oh, that sounds dumb as fuck, right? Like, it just sounds stupid as fuck, and not actually sit there and, like, think through and try to understand that. But that's the reality of the situation. Is that's kind of what we're doing, is we're riding off the oppression of our ancestors who were actually oppressed, and trying to scrape some advantage, like any advantage we can off of it. And it's like, it's human nature, bro. Like, you got to understand, like, people do this by default. What you're asking white people to do is to not do that by default, because it leads to evil. Even though we know it's easy, we know by default, not by default, you don't come out by default racist, but you come out by default being more comfortable around people that look like you, right? You're just going to, by default, be more comfortable around other black people if you come out black, because they look like you, and they're going to understand you a little bit more than maybe a white kid who maybe had a whole different set of cultural influences growing up, and financial and all sorts of other different influences growing up than you might have had. So it's not just skin color. We are different people in a sense, but the beauty of it is we're all different people under the same roof, which is all one nation under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all, right? Like, it's just like the most beautiful saying ever, and we're taking it away from, and I get it. Let's be real here. Pledging allegiance to the flag, like, what does that sound like? That doesn't. It does sound quite dangerous. pledging allegiance to the flag. Oh, my bad. I was doing a little. It sounds like some Hitler shit. Like, I'm not gonna lie, but in here's why knowledge of history is important, because while I might want to go, yeah, but the message is good, right? Like, the message is in liberty and justice for all, right? In unity, basically. It's like, yeah, but we know damn well the ends does not justify the means. Like, that's one thing we've learned the hard way throughout the 19th century. So, in the early 20th century too. So, regardless, it's like, one thing I also notice, again, speaking from a black perspective, is a lot of us are only concerned about black history, but we're not concerned so much about world history. We're like, what that got to do with us? You know what I mean? Black history, that's got something to do with me, right? Because I'm black. World history, all this white people shit, what the white people involve themselves in, I don't have to worry about all that kind of shit. And it's just like, again, imagine you were white, right? And you just changed the whole situation around. It was like, I don't have to worry about, like, I'm white. I don't have to worry about what black people were doing. That's them. That's racist as shit. Well, I don't know. A lot of us would actually be a big fan of that idea nowadays, and me included. But, maybe that's why we think that way. We'd rather just kind of have white people just left us alone. But at the same time, it's like see, here's the other thing. We were sold out by our own people. Like, people act like slavery is some American white thing. Like, white people invented slavery or some shit. It's like, this was a thing that we were already doing to each other. White people were just like, wait a minute, I can profit off this. Let's start siphoning a couple motherfuckers over here, get literal human slave labor for cheap. And not only that, they're human beings. They can reproduce and produce. You get free workers, basically. It's like, as evil as an idea as that might have been, what you have to understand is they didn't come up with that idea. They merely came across what was already going on and was like, shit, might as well take advantage, right? Like, white people, they do work differently than us. That's one thing we do have to understand as black folks. And a lot of us, I don't know. It's just hard to be in the middle here, because, like, it's either a lot of people, they're like black and white on the issue, right? There's no nuance to the situation. They're like, either everybody's exactly the same, we're all humans, we're all exactly the same, or your racial identity is the most important factor in your existence, right? Neither are true, but your racial identity is indeed, it will shape your character, it will shape the way your body develops and the way your brain develops, and all sorts of different things will all develop relatively the same, because we are all Homo sapiens sapiens. We're all, this advanced ape-like species that we are. And the real marker for it is we're all capable of language. We're all capable of thinking about the past, present, and future. We're all capable of, like, we're all humans, basically. And that's also a part of it, but we're slightly different humans. Just like you have puppies and Labradors. They're both dogs, right? They're the same species, but they're very different. Even like different types of pit bulls, right? They all have different temperaments. Some that grow up in certain environments will have telling characteristics and telling personality traits. Like, oftentimes dogs will have not specific personalities. Like, all dogs of the same breed come out with the same personality, but they'll come out with very similar personality traits. And so the same thing applies to human beings. Like, white people and black people, we do work a little bit differently when it comes to certain areas, but what we have to understand is that's kind of how white people operate. If something, I'm not going to say they've never started anything evil, but the real folly when it comes to the way white people operate is like, they'll kind of just go along with shit, right? They'll go along with shit, even if it's evil. If, like, fuck it, hey man, I just want to make sure I'm good. As long as we're good over here, we'll do whatever It's asked of us. Just let's be good, basically. Not good as in good people, but good as in let's make sure my family's all right. If everybody else has to starve, tough shit, buddy, but my family's gonna survive. So that's kind of like the way white people operate and go about things. Whereas black people, we operate in a more collective sense, right? Like, and it's not to call it tribal. We don't operate in some black versus white sort of way. It's just been our natural affinity for unification has been kind of used against us and weaponized. And now it's used as like now it's like black versus white and we're tribal now. And it's like all this other shit. It's like, dude, black people, like, I'll put it like this. If a black person goes into a majority white area and a white person goes into a majority black area, you see the difference in the way people treat those that look differently. A white person can safely walk through a majority black area. A black person cannot safely walk through a majority white area.
Yes.
Let's be real here. This is a truism, not only in America, but worldwide. Right? Even in Africa. Very similar things. Now, of course, in Africa, you can walk through a lot of white areas relatively safely. Not all of them, though. Like, there are some highly racist places in Africa. But as far as places you can go as a white person that you can't walk through, that are majority black, like it's only black people that live there and stay there. It's like there's not historically been that many. Like there's like, of course, big revolutions and stuff because there's a small minority of white people that live. It's not a small minority, but obviously Africa is far more black than it is white. But white people own most of the land and the resources and opportunities and jobs. And it really doesn't make sense when you think about it, but like, it just doesn't, right? That it really shouldn't be the case. But either way, the point I'm getting at is like, if you look at like independent journalists and stuff, and they'll go like to these all black places in Africa where you don't see any white people at all. And like, these independent journalists, sometimes they'll be the first white person these people have seen in like decades. And they just treat them with so much love and respect and care, and will actually protect them against actual racism, while they're there. You have people that will like try to come up and like be like, oh wow, like a white person, you know what I mean? They'll try to be like, they'll like put their skin up to theirs, like, damn, like we really is the same. Like, it's just so, this affinity that we have for unification is being used against us. And it's actually so beautiful because we do treat everybody with love, care, and respect. And now we're being seen as these like tribalistic, sort of people. And we're just not. We've never been that. We've always been like peaceful, loving creatures who happen to be physically well endowed. You know what I mean? But like gentle giants in a sense. Like, that's just how black people, like, South Africa is the only country in the entire world to have independently developed nukes and then decided on their own to decommission them. Not because they were bullied to by America or Russia or any of these other superpowers, but just because they decided, yeah, this is, nah. You know what I mean? Like, it just causes way too much suffering and horror. We good on this. But they did develop their nukes, on their own, without help. So that's how I see black people. Like, we're extremely competent people in all manners of life, but we're also extremely peaceful. And I have to kind of curtail myself and realize that this does not make us better than white people. The same way white people, having colonized, large swaths of the world and kind of brought civilization to the next level, that doesn't make them better than us. But they do have that advantage. Like, they have some sort of advantage put it like this. We were evolved for different environments. Black people were